Today I've got a special treat. I'm going to show you my very first printer that I purchased and assembled. This one right here. And I'm actually doing some printing on it. Actually printing a part, one of the first parts that I printed on this printer. So I went back in the files, and we're going back to December of 2019 when I purchased the printer and did the CAD drawing for this particular part for the what became the helping hand. Well, since I'm doing this video about my first 3D printer, I thought I would go back and look in some of my files and find out exactly when I purchased my first printer and how much and the details. And I found it right here, which is says that I actually purchased my first 3D printer on December 1st of 2019, and the expected delivery was by December 10th, 2019. So I assume I probably received it around the 8th or the 9th of December, and it was an A8 with resume print, and the sales price was $85.49. So I think in some of my previous videos I said I thought I paid $134 for it or something like that. But in fact, I paid $85.49. So it wasn't that much of an investment, but as you probably saw in the video, the printer is still running and printing like new. So it looks like we got a bargain back there in December. To give you a little history about this printer, I purchased it on eBay, not really looking at any reviews or anything else. I figured I'll just get an inexpensive 3D printer and see if I can get it to work. And I downloaded the Autodesk 123D Design CAD software, and I thought, well, I'll see if I can do a CAD drawing and get it to work. And so I did. Obviously this was my first attempt, and it was one of the first, actually the first part that I printed on this printer. I printed a couple cylinders and a square block, I think, and once I got that printed and was comfortable that the printer was going to print, then I drew this part, and it really hasn't changed a whole lot from those early, from the original concept and idea. You can see the two here and see that there are differences, but basically the size stayed the same. Had to reinforce this, but in general the part came out pretty good, and I didn't have to redesign the concept. These slots, and they're still the same specs that I started with. I may have made some minor tweaks to them, but now I did. There have probably been 20 revisions or 20 changes to this part from this point getting to here. Some of those are minor, getting the shape and size of the electronic component holes so that the electronic components would snap in and hold good. getting this little stem built for the to screw down the cover plate for the electronics, and the placement of these two little pilot holes for the screws that attach the locking mechanism and so forth. So there have been a lot of minor changes, and the biggest one was reinforcing this holder here so that it would be almost impossible under normal conditions to break this part. So those are some of the things that I wanted to just bring you up to date on, and it's kind of good in a way to be able to fire up the old printer. Obviously the 5-button control here, and the screen is a lot different than some of the newer printers. The biggest thing is the fact that every nut and bolt and screw, motor, everything in this printer came in pieces, and it took about a day to assemble this printer. So now things are so much simpler and easier. A lot of that work's done for you. I don't think I had any major problems with the printer once I got it assembled. It was a learning process for me, but I learned how to adjust it, and I learned a few things that I passed along in some videos about some of the printers, but not much on these because it was a very early printer for me, actually quite a while before I started posting these videos on YouTube. By the time I was doing the YouTube videos, I was printing on the King Runes and the A-Nets, and had pretty much quit printing on this printer. Probably, if I need to, I can get them going again. A few things characteristically about this printer. If you notice, it's on a solid, thick piece of wood here. Very smooth, finished piece of wood. You have to have a very flat, smooth, stable surface for this type of printer because of the frame. If it moves the least little bit, it can throw out the alignment. And normally, if I'm running these in production, I would have clamps to clamp this printer to this board to make sure that nothing moved or torqued. Because right now, if I tilted the top of this back, this front would probably lower, a very small fraction, but enough that it could mess up the print. And even turning it side to side, as you can see, it's with these rods and shafts, there's not a tremendous amount of stability to this thing, not if you're trying to do some precision printing. And then I took this design for the helping hand and created a G-code file out of it and plugged it in, and we started printing away. As a matter of fact, we're printing with the same filament that I printed this first part on over, well, not quite 2 years ago, but almost 2 years ago. So this light blue filament here, and I had some left that I never used because once we started doing production parts, we were primarily black and orange, but I had some of this left. It's been sealed up, and took it out and started printing. And I printed one. This is one that finished last night. I printed it, and it turned out pretty good considering this printer hasn't been run for probably over a year now, because once I started getting my King Runes and my Tronixes and A-nets and so forth, they kind of took over the work, and it was enough of a job keeping them going. But yeah, this was December 17th when I created this file for printing. And there have been a lot of modifications made to this part of the helping hand, because today it looks like this, which is there are a lot of changes on it, and especially with the support back here, a lot stronger. You can see the difference between these two, the difference in the support. This was just too fragile, it could break off. Also, you can see the infill patterns on this one, because the outer layers were very thin originally, and I was using 20% infill, and it just wasn't a very strong part. Also, you can see the holes that I put in these things are totally relocated. I did change a lot on the electrical part of it. So anyway, I just thought I would saw this printer sitting over here and realized it hadn't been run for a year, and thought, well, I wonder if it still works, and fired it up and actually took the 2-year-old or almost 2-year-old filament and put it in there, and that was the first print that I printed yesterday. It came out pretty good considering. And this second one that I'm printing now looks like it's doing all right. So, and you'll notice back then I used to use tape for the bed. Everything was pretty crude. This printer had to be assembled. Every nut and bolt in this thing was piece by piece, and it took me almost a full day to get this thing assembled and running back then. And nowadays we get the A-nets or something, and they come in and it's a 10-minute assembly and setup, and you're running. Okay, we've finished our second print here on my first 3D printer. So in the meantime, we'll take this second piece that we printed off, and it looks pretty much identical to the first one. So this is where it all started. The whole thing started for me with this printer and this first part that I actually drew and printed. And the rest is becoming history. So until the next time, happy printing from NewTek Inventors.